Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about races of Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires that I would not expect a DLC for. At least not a paid DLC. We might get some free content, we might get free patches, we might get free reworks, character updates. Maybe, maybe not. But I would not necessarily expect a paid DLC for them. The one race that's not going to be on this list is Bretonnia because they could decide to do a paid DLC. I do expect a Bretonnia update. Whether or not they actually break their rules in regards to Bretonnia and actually make a paid DLC for it, or keep things free for Bretonnia, that is a big question mark. It depends on how they decide to tackle that from a business standpoint. But regardless, at number 5, we have the Lizardman. Now, the Lizardman certainly could use a rework. Whether or not they need a paid DLC is a different subject, because they have a bunch of units, and that's not really the problem of Lizardmen. They have a bunch of characters, they have a bunch of legendary lords, heroes, etc. But the way their race works right now in Warhammer 3 is just not great. Between the research, their construction, the jungle itself, Lizardmen are in a pretty bad state. But the reason I would not expect a DLC for the Lizardman is we haven't heard anything on the subject, except CA saying that they're looking to update the geomantic web, and that was some time ago, so who knows what their current plans are. But outside of that kind of statement, we haven't seen anything in leaks, we haven't heard mention of it from official sources in a long time, and given the amount of content that already exists for the Lizardmen, as well as the fact that many of their big characters are already in the game, I would not necessarily expect a paid DLC for the Lizardmen. I think the best we can hope for the Lizardmen is a free update that would address at least some of their issues. Now, from my perspective, I would very much like a paid DLC for the Lizardmen, because that would be an opportunity for Creative Assembly to address a lot of their issues. Construction time, structures, research tree, jungle, individual campaigns, lack of mechanics, like Mazdamundi. Poor Mazdamundi, he's in such a bad state, but I just don't necessarily think it's going to happen. For any number of reasons, maybe just Creative Assembly thinks it's not worth focusing on the Lizardmen. Maybe they figure, well, we already released plenty of content for the Lizardmen, we've got a different focus in Warhammer 3 going forward. At number 4, we have the Beastmen. Now, the Chinese leak that revealed that CA was going to do Norsca as part of the next DLC and Sail the Faithless in particular, did mention that Creative Assembly was going to do a DLC for the Beastmen in the form of Moonclaw. But it's worth keeping in mind that FLC is just a term that Creative Assembly made up, and just because someone is using the term DLC doesn't mean that it's going to be paid. I could see CA doing a free DLC for the Beastmen, updating them as a race in a patch, adding a new legendary lord, legendary hero, and so on and so forth. But for them to do a paid DLC, I think that's pretty far-fetched in a lot of ways. One of the more important ones is that the same leak that mentioned Moonclaw also mentioned that CA was going to add the Praeton for Slaanesh. And of course, we do expect Slangors to come for Slaanesh in Tides of Torment. And what that really means is that most of the Beastmen roster is going to already be in the game, if not all of the Beastmen roster. The only big unit we're actually missing is the Praeton. So if they add the Praeton with Slaanesh, and they add Slangors for the Slaaneshi DLC, then that would mean we would have the vast majority of Beastmen units in the game, if not all of them. I'm not quite sure what other units they could use for a DLC, but basically, if the majority of content for the Beastmen in terms of units is already in the game, then it doesn't necessarily make sense for Creative Assembly to do a paid DLC for the Beastmen. They could do a free DLC, one way or another. There are plenty of characters they can choose from as legendary lords and legendary heroes if they wanted to. But in terms of your roster, I think they would be reaching out to more obscure sources in order to create a unit roster for that. They could, to be certainly clear on that, they could absolutely make a unit roster if Games Workshop allowed them to do so. But given the amount of time it took Creative Assembly to release a single DLC for the Beastmen, I'm skeptical that they would even release a single Beastmen Legendary Lord, even if it was available for free. Now, I do believe the Beastmen could use updates in Warhammer 3 in terms of their settlements, their dread mechanic, and so on and so forth. Unique mechanics for Legendary Lords. But I would be very surprised at this point if Creative Assembly decide to add another paid DLC character for the Beastmen in Warhammer 3. Or if they did, it would be kind of one of the lower priorities they would have in terms of making content. I think it depends on how they decide to handle content in Total War Warhammer 3 going forward. So if they're gonna just make free DLCs after Tides of Torment, then I wouldn't necessarily expect Beastmen. Because one of that DLCs is going to be Cafe, so Monkey King, unless Monkey King gets counted as Beastmen for whatever reason. So one of those DLCs is going to be Fire Dragon and Monkey King. The other DLC is going to be Nagash, Tankwell, Neferata most likely. So that just leaves one DLC. And one DLC where Creative Assembly could add things like Beastmen. I just don't see them focusing on that when there's plenty of far more popular races that they could focus on. They could do a Dark Elf DLC. They could do Vampire Coast. I also find that pretty unlikely in many ways, but they could do so if they wanted to. They could add Yin Yin. For instance, they could add Vulcan. It depends on how CA decides to handle content, but if they're releasing more than free DLCs after Tides of Torment, that could be a very different situation in terms of the kind of characters and races that they would cover. So it depends on their plans, but I personally find it very unlikely that CA would release another paid DLC for a Beastman. Free DLC? Different discussion. At number 3, we have the Vampire Coast. There's been mention of Tomb Kings. In fact, if we look at the campaign map into the Darklands over here, we see a perfect starting position for Neferata. And if they do Nagash, I think there's a pretty decent chance that they will do something for the Tomb Kings. But Coast, there's been no mention of them. And so my perspective on the subject is, if we're going to get anything whatsoever for the Coast, it's either going to be a free update, probably coming out at the same time that they're doing Nagash, they're doing Neferata, and Coast might just get leftovers from that DLC. Like, here, have a couple of units, have some stuff. But I would not necessarily expect a major update even for the Vampire Coast in the game at the moment. I just don't think the interest is there. And unlike with the Beastmen or the Lizardmen, which have some official and non-official mentions, you don't have any indication whatsoever that Creative Assembly is planning on doing anything for the Vampire Coast. I mean, at most, you could hope that they're going to do a naval-themed DLC. I mean, that's already what Tides of Torment is, assuming that we get Sea Lord Aislinn. But unless they decide to do a DLC focused on, say, Yin Yin, Cafe, and Coast, I wouldn't expect anything for the Coast, unless it's something that the Tomb Kings or Vampire Counts already get. I mean, Counts did get units from the Coast. Maybe the other way around could work as well. I would certainly hope that Creative Assembly does rework them. I would certainly hope for updates, research tree, unit recruitment, economy. You name any specific issue you have with the Vampire Coast, there's a lot of things that do need to be fixed. But I just don't think the interest is there. And there has been literally no mention, not even a hint, that Creative Assembly would be looking to do anything for the Vampire Coast. So I think it's unlikely at this point. At number 2, we have Khorne. Now, for Khorne, it's because they're done. They work very well as a race, they have 3 legendary lords, and Creative Assembly already decided not to release an extra hero option with Omens of Destruction because they didn't have one option. So instead, they decided to released to legendary heroes. I mean, they could do something similar, I suppose, if they wanted to add another Khorne DLC, but I wouldn't actually expect another Khorne paid DLC. At most, they could make Valkia a Khorne faction, or give you the option between playing Valkia as a Khorne faction or a Warriors of Chaos faction. They could do something for the Demon Prince, poor Daniel. That may happen. I think it's unlikely, but possibilities do exist over there with Be'lakor, with Glotkin. Though I think if they're going to do Glotkin, it would make sense to put Glotkin for Nurgle. Out of the demonic races, in general, I would say one shouldn't have high expectations for future DLCs for the demonic races. But if they're going to do anything in regards to Chaos, it likely won't be for Khorne. There might be something for Tzeentch, there might be something for Nurgle, hell, there's even options for Slaanesh, but not necessarily for Khorne, from my point of view on the subject. And look, Khorne is just in a really good state as a race. It works really well, research tree, legendary lord options. Well, they could fix certain things with Skulltaker, but fixing certain things is not the same as doing a paid DLC or even doing a racial rework. That's just, bug fixes, issues with jungle, pathfinding, etc. That would be very welcome with Skulltaker, but it's been quite a few months now, and they haven't really done that. So I'm not sure if they'll even improve Skulltaker's situation. Also, I do wonder what's with the camp over here, teleporting ogre camp since the latest patch or hotfix. Hopefully that does get resolved in the next major patch. It's a bit weird. But yeah, I just don't think that there's going to be any further paid DLC for Khorne. Maybe if they do decide to add stuff for Chaos, they could give Khorne some things as well, but that's about it. And finally, at number 1, we have the Dwarves. I would be very surprised if Creative Assembly did another paid DLC for the Dwarves. It took them years to do any paid DLC after King the Warlord came out in Warhammer 1. So that's when we got Belegar, we got some units, we crucially got Rangers. I think it's highly unlikely that Creative Assembly, given the time span it took them to even release a second paid DLC in Total War Warhammer, and the focus of that DLC, I think it's unlikely that they will do another Dwarf DLC. Joseph Bookman would be one of the more obvious choices for that, but we already have Bookman's Rangers in the game. I guess they could make a weapon variant, just like they did with Black Orcs for Omens of Destruction, but I just don't think it's going to happen. There are certainly plenty of characters, not necessarily as many units or heroes. They could do a Zulfbar DLC. They could add Joseph Bookman as a free Legendary Lord or Legendary Hero. I think it would make more sense for him to be a Legendary Hero from quite a few perspectives. I mean, Grombrindle kind of already has his role, though certainly updating campaign mechanics for existing Legendary Lords for the Dwarves would be welcome, but given the fact that it took CA years to do anything for the Dwarves, I just don't expect it. And certainly what they did in Warhammer 2 with Forik wasn't really great in a lot of different ways. So I don't expect anything with respect to Dwarves in terms of paid content. Maybe, and I'm stretching that, maybe some free content, but there's zero indication that it will happen. And as someone commented quite a few months ago, or even before Thrones Decay came out, most of the remaining Dwarf content before Thrones came out, most of the remaining Dwarf content is focused on Engineers, Slayers, and Runes. We already have Forik, so that's covered with Runes. It would be pretty awkward to do a runic DLC for Dwarves when you have Forik as a free lord. Then with Thrones Decay, they did both things, both Engineers and Slayers at the same time. That was probably the motivating factor behind doing Malachi's campaign, also the association with Gotrek and Felix, at the same time recreating those adventures in campaign form in Warhammer 3. I just don't see it happening going forward, that Creative Assembly would do another paid DLC for the Dwarves. I think they have other priorities. You might ask about the Empire. Sure, the Empire has a bunch of content, but there's still plenty more stuff that they could do, and some very important stuff as well. We do have Valten, we do have Middenland, we are lacking severely in terms of infantry options for the Empire, so that would be very welcome. That's not really the case for the Dwarves. You have infantry options, you have gunpowder options, you have flamethrower options, you have flying unit options, artillery options, hero options. You have a very damn good roster for the Dwarves. You have really good campaign mechanics. If there is a race that could be considered complete, it would be the Dwarves. Updating existing campaigns? Sure. But the race, the way it works, the dynamics of the campaign, just really, really good. So, if you've already got the race in a really good situation, that's played already by a lot of people, there's some argument to be made in favor of making more content for them, but I just don't think it will happen. And that would be it. Costin, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and let me know what you guys think. Some people would argue that we're not going to get more content for Dark Elves. That could be a possibility, but I think it's more likely that we get content for Dark Elves than we get content for Khorne, or Dwarves, or Beastmen, or even Vampire Coast. That's my perspective. Stay tuned.